On one hand, 1-bit technology is a highly reductive concept, but at the same time it is highly conceptual and basis for almost all of your works. Could you, for a start, explain us how you got to the use of 1-bit technology for your music, composition, and sound art pieces?
Yeah, sure. I came to working with technology, electronics in my work, actually through visual art originally. Should we do this again? Because of just tell me when I should stop for sound. Otherwise, I'll keep going. Sorry. 1-bit technology. So, um, actually, I started working with 1-bit sound originally through kind of thinking about kinetic art. I started experimenting with building circuitry and stuff to control motors, thinking about art. And the wonderful thing about working with building your own circuits is that it's very open-ended. This is sort of the definition of it is that the computer chip isn't designed to create sound. It isn't designed to connect to a motor. It isn't designed to connect to a light. It's just abstract in and out. So it sort of led to this idea of just having the direct output from the chip to a speaker and these on and off 1-bit signals, controlling the speaker, moving the speaker cone in and out. And I sort of fell in love with this idea of working at 1-bit, both aesthetically, because the sound was really interesting for me. It was this very rich electronic sound, very primitive kind of sounding sound. But then also conceptually, because suddenly there was this direct connection between the information and the sound wave and the output. And it sort of opened up all of these connections to the world of mathematics that I was already interested in. So it kind of became this main focus for me, really, thinking about 1-bit sound or 1-bit information in general. Yeah.
Can we see them also as a sort of modules that can be then integrated in various situations?
A sort of what, you said?
As a sort of modules.
What?
Modules,
Modules.
Modules,
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. That time it was the accent. To think about 1-bit information as a kind of module, you mean?
That you then transfer to different concepts, different uses of sound.
Yeah, I think about 1-bit signals not as modules so much, but as a medium. It's almost like a content, a material to work with, like an artist would work with some kind of paper or paint or something. For me, it's this waveform, and yeah, I've been exploring this similar kinds of systems in music with live performance, also these albums with circuit boards, but then also in visual art, like connecting it to motors to create drawings or to a television to create images, and then doing sound installations. So yeah, it's really like this kind of medium that doesn't imply any medium. It's just like this kind of information, I guess, or something more abstract.
In the media of sound, did you always have an affinity and interest in different tonal, noise, or rhythmic, even draw patterns, which are heavily present in your works, and intervals and microtonal scales? It seems that you somehow always take limited space, interval, or patterns and then expand it on a larger scale.
Yeah, I think that's my approach in general, to build something complex from very basic starting kind of seed ideas and grow it very slowly. And sometimes it stays very simple. Sometimes it stays austere and quiet and slow. And sometimes it grows into something very, very rich. And that's part of the exploration for me is to think about where. Maybe it's thinking about the instrumentation and how it relates to the electronics if I'm composing, or maybe I'm thinking about really exploring the full potential of the sound. Like in this new project, Tone Patterns, it's about It's primarily about these interference patterns between different 1-bit frequencies, and that is a very rich space. It's a very lush sound, and it kind of like invites me to get like to push that as far as I can. And the interesting thing is on the other side, like this was more true of my recent project called Noise Patterns, which is very similar to tone patterns. It's about these interference patterns of signals. But in noise patterns, like I was playing a lot with having things interfere so much that they become almost silent, because the signal breaks down so much that like it's essentially like silence. Basically, it's empty space, even though it's so much information layered on top of itself. It comes full circle. It becomes kind of nothing at the other side. So so I think there's a lot of different directions maybe to explore, and I'm sort of somewhere in that right now. I don't know.
This is more music-wise. Speaking of shifting patterns and intervals and repetitions that are present in your sound, or machines and relations that are built between them, can we sort of put you in a so-called post-minimalism scene that has in recent years transformed especially the US scene of contemporary music? It's composers like Nico Muhly, Bryce Dessner, and ensembles that you work with, Bjorn Wire, Soul Percussion, Bang on the Can.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I personally, I like the term minimalism. I don't see anything really wrong with it. However, I think that minimalism was very much a product of, you know, a certain time period coming out of 50s and 60s and stuff. And what the things I'm thinking about, I feel like are also more connected to like something more contemporary, like the way I'm thinking about technology. And a lot of my work is kind of like a reaction against the complexity of technology right now. And this is why I released 1-Bit Symphony as a circuit board, or not as, you know, as a circuit where you can trace the path of electricity through the circuit, because you can't do that with your phone. Like modern technology is built to be as opaque and inaccessible as possible, and I'm trying to invite people into understanding technology so that they can kind of understand how all of these systems around us work, because we as citizens or agents or like of using this technology, consumers, we're not really part of the systems that we're using. We're very much kind of cut out of it, and I think that's like a dangerous place to be. So part of my work is also commenting on that. So it's a combination, I guess, of something that's maybe more aesthetic and conceptual, like minimalism, with like all of these things that maybe it's just that I work with technology. All this stuff comes with thinking about technology. Maybe it's like a consequence of the new tool set now, is that it's like it brings in parts of society and culture that are not just about music. You know, it's a little bit bigger for me than that.
How do you build a relationship between 1-bit electronic sounds and acoustic instrument in your pieces for percussions, piano, string instruments, etc.? What relationship do you seek among them?
Yeah, well, in each of my works that combines in each of my composed works for ensemble with electronics, I'm trying to think about different things each time. So if it's for something like string quartet, and the string instruments are capable of playing sustained sounds, then that's something fundamentally different than a piece for piano, where you have an attack and the sound wave has a long decay to it. Or it can be staccato, or it can have this natural decay. And so each time I write for a different configuration of instruments, I'm thinking about these different relationships and trying to like explore that. So the piece that we're doing here tonight, called Observations, it's for crotales and electronics. And the crotales have this very pure metallic sound. It's a percussion instrument that is very electronic almost in its nature, and so I'm combining this pulse on the crotales with these kind of polyrhythmic pulses in the electronics. But in another piece, I wrote for 5 accordions and 5 speakers. It's called Elevation Maps, and the whole thing is just slow, long, drifting tones, very high pitched, high frequency, and so. I think that when a composer writes for acoustic instrumentation, they're always thinking about what can be, what can be played on that instrument, what's natural, what's idiomatic for that instrument to play. And I think the same thing is true with electronics, like especially working with one-bit sound, it can't do everything. So I'm trying to think about like what aspect of one-bit sound is something that connects with the acoustic sound, and how can they like share the stage in a way that's meaningful and that treats the electronics like an acoustic instrument too.
Outside of the frame that sometimes seems quite mathematical, there is the timbral and textural quality of sound and relations between them on microtonal level that are producing also psychoacoustic phenomena, etc. in your music. Things that sort of transcend this mathematical structure. How important is the sound in the space for you? The space, the resonance, and the space between your music sound and the listener, what he's perceiving.
Yeah. I think it's more connected, actually, to the conceptual side of things. Like, for me, it's similar to like when one understands the laws of physics, then you can see a new kind of beauty in the world. And I think that part of the aesthetic response to minimalism, at least for me, is understanding the simple structures that are part of it. I think that there's the beauty of the sound itself, which is something. It's moving, it's emotional. But then I think that the conceptual side of it, the mathematical side, can also be emotional. And for me, when I listen, especially to early minimalism, it's very emotional music, even though it's very conceptual. I think it taps into the same kind of like condition, this human condition, like when you look up and you see the moon at night or something like that. These like natural phenomena that are beautiful, but because they have a scientific side to them.
Certain time ago, I played, as you mentioned, noise patterns on my radio show, where you shifted your one-bit concept from tones to noise. In your premiere work on Sonica yesterday, it seems like you have synthesized a lot of previous concept in one dense idea and realization. What is the core concept behind the piece that we listened to yesterday?
The core idea behind tone patterns. I think it's funny because One Bit Symphony, which was before noise patterns, was all tones. And then I sort of replaced tones with noise, but then that needed a new approach to the music. Basically, I decided to work more on the textural level and have these slow changes as opposed to these kind of more musical structural changes, compositional changes. And so I created a new approach for working with my own, a new approach in my own work when I did noise patterns. And tone patterns was sort of bringing that same approach back to tone, back to pitch. And so structurally, it's very, very, the approach, the sound approach, the interest in the sound is very similar to noise patterns, except now I'm back in the world of tones. So it's kind of like, it's more connected to One Bit Symphony in its sound content, but the compositional approach is totally different. It's coming from noise patterns. So I think you see noise patterns and tone patterns as this sort of like pair of projects that are using the same approach to opposite ends of the sound spectrum of tones and noise. You know?
Do you see yourself also in the lineage of the tradition of hacking, DIY culture of building your electronics, modules, circuits? Because you are one of the rare to work also with larger institutions, environments, such as LA Philharmonics. Otherwise, it seems like this DIY scene is still pretty much underground based.
Maybe. I think it's the spirit is very much the same. I think that DIY culture is this sort of approach to um, it's an open-endedness, right? It's saying that this piece of technology, if it doesn't do what I want, then I can modify it, or I can create my own to do what I want to do. So you're not stuck just being a consumer when you know how to program, when you know how to build electronics, when you know how to hack something. So I think that's very important. And like when I think about the sort of more social side of my work, it connects very strongly to that. I'm also in a side project called Loud Objects, and I think we're maybe a little bit closer to that culture, because in my own work, I take all of these ideas and then I formalize them into this very sort of rigid compositional structure or artistic structure or something. And in this other project, Loud Objects, it's more improvisational and like more of a free spirit, where we build circuits from scratch while we perform. It's very unpredictable, and we're actually soldering, and there's sort of like this aspect of I don't know, it's like more fun, more comical on some level too, but like it allows me to kind of explore some other territories that I don't get to do in my own work. And I was thinking also about the circuit bending scene. Like when I started working with one-bit sound, around that time I was also like, I started performing in like chiptunes scenes and also in circuit bending scenes, especially with Loud Objects. And this was like a very New York moment. And so I think I took a lot from those cultures, basically. Like I was playing in classical music shows and then in chiptunes shows, and like Loud Objects was doing some conceptual performances, but then also like we came out of thinking about circuit bending and like the art form of taking, like circuit bending being the art form of taking a toy and opening it up and like rewiring it to create a musical instrument out of that. Like we're not doing that, but it's a similar kind of approach.
For the end, I saw your microtonal wall in the first exhibition dedicated to sound art in MoMA a few years ago in New York City. That exhibition at the time said a lot about finally establishing sound art as an integral part of contemporary art. But as I've been hearing a lot, regardless of appearances, studies, exhibitions, rise of artists in the field, that the conditions for sound artists are still not the same as for the other fields of contemporary art, regarding commissions, exhibitions, fees, and value on the art market. What is your take on that, since you do cross different fields from composer, musician to sound artist itself?
I don't know. I'm not very involved in that discussion, I think. I think that there are plenty of places that are showing sound art. And I mean, this is just true of so many art fields that it takes a while to get into museums, like especially the big museums. So maybe I just think that it's sort of built into this whole thing that there's. I don't know really how to comment on it. I think that like, yeah, sure, I would love there to be more sound art, but I'd love there to be like more art from the last 5 years in general in these institutions. So there's different agendas, and then there's things change. I don't know. I'm not saying anything that makes any sense, but of course I would love to see more, but I don't necessarily see it so much as a problem. I don't know, maybe just that certain institutions are slower than others. I think that's the thing. Is it just doesn't look as open-minded as like these places don't look as open-minded as they could.